Greetings and welcome back to Doctor Who Revisited, where I go through every single episode of Doctor Who from 1963 all the way to 2023 and review them. And now we are on to the final episode of the John Pertwee era, Planet of the Spiders. I like this episode. There's a lot of interesting points I like to bring up about it, but as a fun finale for a Doctor, this kind of feels a bit bland. If we're just looking at the episodes that we had thus far, we had, the introduction of the Cybermen. We had a global Cybermen takeover of Earth. We had the War Games, which, probably one of the biggest episodes the Doctor Who's ever done. And then we had this. And, just looking at some of the Doctors we've got coming up, we've got uh, with Tom Baker, the Master on the verge of destroying the universe, and future version of the Doctor running around. Don't even get me started on some of the regeneration episodes in the modern series, where we got the Doctor fighting off against Daleks, against the Master and Time Lords. Some of the regeneration episodes in the modern series are incredibly bombastic and huge. This episode, we get giant spiders, which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all for giant talking spiders in Doctor Who, but like I said, kind of feels a little bit bland. But so this episode kind of starts with a plot point that it introduces, and then immediately drops on the floor and forgets it ever existed, about the whole people can be clairvoyant, and we get introduced that with Professor guy whatever that can has telekinesis and can read minds and stuff, dies in the first episode. And the idea is kind of that doesn't really get addressed as much again, unless you want to count Lupton's connection with the spider on his back that kind of gives him the power or the ability to teleport, and that somehow is then connected with the power of meditation, which is a big major part of this episode. The with the Tibetan monks that Yates is now trying to get his life together through. So I guess in a way that plot point still remains as part of this episode, but not that much. So yeah, that's a little bit kind of disappointing that you kind of see this a lot in some six-parters, especially season finales, where like the first two episodes kind of don't really matter all that much. It's really just the later four episodes that are the meat and bones of the episode itself. But yeah, it's nice. It's fun. It's a trope that some of these six-part episodes have, and I've learned to live with them. Now, as I mentioned, Yates is back, and I love that the invasion of the dinosaurs was not the end of his character. I love that he sort of got a bit of an epilogue, a nicer way of finishing off that character in Doctor Who. Doesn't show up again in the show outside of Doctor Who decade anniversaries or reunions and whatnot. Of course, Richard Franklin, who sadly passed away last month, I believe. He still kept on being a major part of Doctor Who pretty much till the day he died. He continued to play the character of Mike Yates on Big Finish. He continued to be involved with Doctor Who in conventions and stuff. He even played Davros's father on a Big Finish miniseries at one point or another. So, yeah, Richard Franklin, massive contribution to Doctor Who, and he will be sorely missed. Of course, when I say last month, it's as of the recording of this video, not, whenever this video is going to get uploaded eventually. But I just wanted to clarify that. But, so Richard Franklin, this was his swan song as far as Doctor Who television is concerned, and I like it. I like that they gave this character a second chance, which, it's one of the main things that Doctor Who does a lot with a lot of its characters. And I kind of like how all this Asian style meditation and a journey of rediscovery, it's even mentioned in the narrative of the episode, how much of it kind of sounds like Time Lords regenerating. in a way. And I think this is also where the words regeneration or to regenerate is first ever being associated with Doctor Who and Time Lords and the changing of one actor to the other. So I feel like this episode really does set up a lot in terms of Doctor Who lore. Case in point, I mean, we get to see the Doctor's old mentor, the Hermit, which sadly doesn't really get shown up ever again in Doctor Who, in the television show. He does show up a number of times on other Doctor Who media. I mean, he shows up in some of the novels and flashbacks. Definitely some of the novels that I've read, but unfortunately, in Doctor Who, besides maybe a few mentions here and there, he doesn't really get brought up ever again. I mean, the Doctor really heavily mentioned him in the Time Monster, so this is kind of the conclusion of that story. So this episode really does conclude a lot of interesting stories that was set up in the Third Doctor era, like the Hermit, which was mentioned in that episode, and we finally get to see him fully. We get to see get an update, I should say, about where Jo Grant is in life, and she even sends the Doctor the Metabulus crystal that he gave her for a wedding as a wedding present. And like, since when do you return wedding presents? I mean, to be fair to Jo, he didn't really plan on getting everything. The whole wedding was kind of spontaneous. It happened in the moment, and the Doctor, who already spent like the better part of an entire season trying to get to Beatles 3 and bring back that crystal, which was very useful in that episode, he's like, oh, you know what? Here, a wedding present. And now she's returning it. There's a lot of weird, strange stuff surrounding that crystal when you really think about it, especially when you consider how incredibly important it ended up being in this episode. But I just really like that in the age we live in right now, where even in the Shuri Gatwa series, where something introduced in one episode is going to be a major theme all throughout the next season, leading up to a big major season finale. I mean, we all remember the days of Bad Wolf being mentioned every other episode, Torchwood being mentioned every other episode, the mystery of Harold Saxon and the cracks in the skin of the universe, and all that, and of course Clara Oswald, obviously. No idea why I mentioned that for no reason, but we in an era where we've seen that type of stuff in Doctor Who, it's nice to sometimes look back and to the classic series and see that something like that was kind of set up in the John Pertwee era. I can't remember of any other examples when stuff like that happened throughout an entire seasonal arc outside of just the Key to Time season, which of course we are going to talk about eventually. But just the whole idea of the Doctor trying to basically spending the majority of season 10 trying to reach Metabulus 3 and failing, finally getting there on the season finale and bringing back a crystal that gets forgotten for the entirety of next season until the final episode of his final season, where it actually becomes much more important, and we actually get to see the continuation of what happened to Metabulus 3 that the Doctor traveled to in the Green Death. So it's interesting. I don't think there's a lot of, or rather any other example I can think of outside of the Key to Time season in classic series of Doctor Who, but it's interesting. It's very, very interesting that we got to see that specific journey within Doctor Who. And moving back into Metabulus 3, first of all, massively changed since the Doctor was last on that planet. But even then, I mean, just the colonists living on the planet, it's, again, I keep saying this over and over and over again, I love the world building in Doctor Who, especially in the classic series. I mean, we've already seen colonists from Earth in A Colony in Space. This is the kind of a continuation to that, and it's also several centuries after they settled on the planet and they build their own communities. And there's so much history and stories and lore that happened on that planet on Metabulus 3. And I just love the story of how the spiders rose to prominence. Of like, so some random spiders were smuggled in on the colonist ship when they arrived on the planet. Some of them accidentally blew off through the window into a cave where they sort of got radiated by the Metabolus crystals, and that's how. And it took them several hundred years, but that's how they became the all-powerful telepathic psychic uh, spiders that they are. Or sorry, eight legs, because apparently it's racist to call them spiders for some reason. But it's an interesting story, and I like that. And I guess it kind of shows you what happens when you don't take care of the problem when it's small. Hint, hint. But yeah, so the spiders themselves, I think the Doctor, in a Big Finish episode, the Eighth Doctor mentions that not only are they incredibly powerful psychics, but they're just some of the most powerful psychic creatures that he's ever faced. Not just relative to spiders, just in general. I mean, we see what the Great One, all praise to the Great One,
All praise to the Great One,
did to the Doctor. She basically turned him into a puppet on a string. That's terrifying. When you can do that to Time Lords, and more specifically to the Doctor, like putting the Doctor through that, you can see why the Doctor was so afraid of the Great One. All praise to the Great One.
all praise to the Great One.
Of course, a natural fear of spiders is nothing new. It's a primal fear of sorts. But talking spiders that can shock you and control your mind, that makes it even more terrifying. That just takes the terror factor up through the roof. And it's a great way. It's a great way to build a Doctor Who villain, I would say. Of course, I wish the spiders would have looked a lot better. But I mean, I think I read somewhere in Doctor Who magazine that the props that they made for the spiders were so realistic that they were afraid it will cause massive panic among arachnophobes. So they scrapped the whole lot and made new ones, which were a little less realistic and a little more plasticky. And still, people with arachnophobia lost their minds over it. So I guess you really can't win. But I would like to see a remade version of this episode with updated effects. But I think probably the main positive I can say about this episode is the character Lupton. Of course, played by, and I hope I'm pronouncing the guy's name right, John Dearth? Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name. I'm terrible with names, as you probably know by now. But I mean, he's the same guy that voiced the boss, the supercomputer in The Green Death. But I don't know what it is. Just the guy's voice. I can listen to the guy talk all day long. And the biggest example I can say for my affection for the way the guy talks is when the first spider shows up in episode, well, technically episode 1, but also, I mean, the moment itself is from episode 2, where the spider shows up, electrifies the guy, and he's like, "Go, I command you, go. I have come to give you the power you seek." Power?
Go. I command you, go.
I have come to give you the power you seek.
Power?
That is just Doctor Who acting at its finest. I love it. The cheesy 70s acting of power. And just the way he pronounces some of those words, like, the Doctor? This is the crystal you need? This will give us power? I love it. I mean, like I said, I can listen to the guy talk all day long. And speaking of which, just in The Green Death, when he plays the supercomputer of like, Stevens? And when the Doctor throws him off with that one logic question, it's like, I shall figure this out. I shall. Ah, man, the guy, such a national treasure in Doctor Who. I wonder if he did anything else in Doctor Who besides that, or just no. It's an actor I would definitely like to have followed if I lived back in the 70s. But yeah, just the inclusion of the character of Lupton in this episode really does elevate it so much, in my opinion, and I just love it. So yeah, I'll just leave you with that. As far as other stuff about this episode, I think this it's something that's kind of become a bit of a meme in Doctor Who, but the chase scene in episode 2. I mean, it's a really good, interesting chase scene. Don't get me wrong, but it feels like it kind of takes over half an episode for no reason. It kind of feels pointless. Let me just walk you through all the different points of that chase scene. Okay, just try to follow me here for a second. All right, so does the chase scene begins? Lupton teleports the crystal into his hand and starts running off with it, punching Benton on his way out. And when he's followed by the Doctor, Benton, and Sarah Jane, he accidentally runs into the Brigadier. Brigadier tries to shoot him and he avoids the bullets. He runs into the Doctor's old hover car, the Whomobile, and the Doctor warns the Brigadier not to damage his car. He drives off with the car. Benton shows up with Bessie. They all get into the car. They chase after him. But then the Doctor tells him to go to an airstrip. He gets into a tiny helicopter and follows him through the air, coordinating the Brigadier on the ground. And so him and the Whomobile running away. Brigadier, Sarah Jane, and Benton chasing him in Bessie. And the Doctor is above the whole scene in the tiny helicopter. They run past a policeman who chases them off, joins the chase. They lead them into an open area, an open lot, where he leaves the car unnoticed. And while they're all standing around looking for him, he gets inside the tiny helicopter and flies off. The Doctor and Sarah Jane move back into the Whomobile, and apparently the thing can fly now. So they take off and they start chasing him in the sky until he runs out of fuel. He lands near a dock, continues to run by foot, and knocks two guys out and gets into a boat and speeds through the large body of water. The Doctor, on his own, gets into a hovercraft and chases him, going over several stretches of land, even runs over a guy who's just trying to have a nap. Then he finally catches up to him, pulls out very, very close to the speedboat, jumps from the hovercraft into the boat. He finally catches up to the guy, and then he teleports away. Okay, this is the chase scene that I just described. Like, feels like he could have just teleported straight away. We didn't need all that chase scene, but I suppose they needed to fill out a full episode. That's it. I mean, it goes back to I think something I said in either this episode or a previous one, but kind of feels like the first two episodes are kind of, I think I did say this about this episode. Kind of feels like the two episodes were kind of time consuming, and the meat of the episode is in the later four episodes. But you know what? Whatever. It's a thing, and it happened, and it got us to where we needed to go, which is, of course, the crystal, and now in Lupton's hands, and he's back in the retreat. Some not so great things we need to talk about. Once again, Doctor Who does it again, or the classic Doctor Who does it again. The racist yellow face on white actors playing Asian characters. You know what? It's a sign of the times. It was wrong back then, even though they didn't know it was wrong. It's super wrong now. But the writing is good. That's all I'm going to say. That's really one of the major problems the classic Doctor Who suffered, is that they had a lot of these, unfortunately, racist yellow-faced characters in really good episodes. And then that's a major problem that they faced. Thankfully, we're not seeing any of that in the modern series anymore. Not that I'm aware of, at least. But for a while, it was a thing. And while again, I don't justify doing that. I like the inclusion of the characters of Kanpo and Choji. Again, I wish they'd done it better. But I mean, it's the Doctor's mentor, the Doctor's friend, the Hermit that we've heard about so much in the Time Monster. So I get it. I mean, it's a major character. You can't obviously write the entire character out of the story because he's too important, too integral to the Doctor's life. So it's just unfortunate that such a great character received that treatment behind the scenes, but you're here to judge the um, the story the way it is, not how it was made. And I think the way it is very entertaining for a Doctor Who story. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think of if there's any other points I wanted to bring up. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that uh, Sarah can just teleport and the Doctor doesn't even question it, doesn't even notice it. I mean, because I mean, of course, you know that she's got the eight-leg queen on her back, and that's how she teleported. But the fact that the Doctor isn't even questioning it, that's kind of weird and very undoctor like of him to do. But to be fair to him, he's kind of going through a lot of stuff at that moment. But yeah, wish that we got to see more of the the two legs rebellion against the eight legs on Metabolist 3. We kind of don't really get to see much. We get to see them prepare for the rebellion, and when we later show up back on Metabolist 3, they're all essentially slaves for the eight legs. None of that mattered. Nothing really happened. But yeah, so I wish we got to see more of the human colony on Metabolist 3, the architecture and the clothes. Sorry, the clothes, the fashion sense of, I should say, of sorry, I found the word I was looking for. The costume design looks amazing, and there's some really interesting lore in there that I sadly didn't really get to explore all of that much. Uh, and yeah, so the final villain speech, as ridiculous and cheesy as it is, I love it. It's a great villain speech. I mean, and it's coming from a sentient giant spider. Like, how cool is that? That's such an awesome, badass, cheesy as all hell speech is coming from a giant spider. And it's another one of those cases of uh, the thing that the villain sought after the most ends up being the thing that destroys them. And you know what? It was the Doctor that brought that thing to her, which does put a stamp on his involvement in it. He's part of the timeline now. That by giving the villain what she wanted, he defeated her, and that's very much a classic Doctor Who thing to do. And of course, the regeneration scene, where I think by this point they're starting to know what they've got on their hands with this concept. It's no longer just the Doctor collapses, there's some light, and there's a completely different actor. There's some build up to it. They're setting up the scene. Obviously, we get to see another Time Lord regenerating, which of course is Kanpo regenerating into Choji, or just Kanpo the Hermit regenerating. Let's call it that. Which of course really puts a stamp on how this regeneration works, more or less. And yeah, so we get the Doctor's final moments with Sarah Jane and the Brigadier, and I just love the line of "I got lost in a time vortex. The TARDIS brought me home." It's interesting that the first time we actually see the Third Doctor, the TARDIS brings him home. TARDIS lands on Earth, and he falls out of the TARDIS. And this is exactly the same thing that happens in this episode. He got lost in the time vortex. The TARDIS brought him home, unit base, and he falls out of it, collapsing on the floor. It's a great closure, and I love it. It's tying this whole era up in a nice, neat little bow, and even setting up for the future, because we get a mention of Sullivan and several times throughout the episode, which of course we later know who this Sullivan really is in the next episode, but that's of course a story for another time. I like the emotional moment between the Doctor and Sarah Jane, and yeah, so the Doctor regenerates into Tom Baker. Finally, the scarf is gonna make a lot more sense now that I'm wearing these in these revisited episodes. But yeah, I talked for almost half an hour about this episode. Turns out I really like it a little bit more than I thought I did. But yeah, so this is my review for Planet of the Spiders. Let me know what you all think about it. And how does it stack up in your mind when it comes to Doctor Who Regeneration episodes. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next Doctor, Tom Baker. I can't wait to see to dive deep into that one. So until the next one, everybody, power. Hi there. Thank you for watching the video. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'll see you next time.